Good evening and welcome to the Oceanside Planning
Recording
Commission
in progress.
meeting for September 25th. Can I get everybody to rise and we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance? Repeat after me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. City Planner, please do the roll.
Certainly. Chairman Rosales.
Present.
Vice Chair Morrissey.
Here.
Commissioner Balma.
Present.
Commissioner Anthony.
Present.
Commissioner Dodds.
Present.
And Commissioner Malik.
Present.
Please let the record show that all commissioners are present. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Do we have any slips this evening to speak on communications not on tonight's agenda?
Actually, yes, we do. We have a Lawrence Bryan here for advance written request to reserve time to speak. He would like to come up and talk about Brother Benno's.
Great. Come on forward.
Oh, here we go again.
For the record, give us your name, please.
Lawrence Bryan, resident of Oceanside since November of 1980. I am not here at all to represent Brother Benno's. While I do volunteer there regularly, I had an opportunity for the last session to have some takeaways. One was that we all agree that there's no police solution to the homelessness or whatever's going on at Brother Benno. Brother Benno's provides a value to the city. Property management is actively seeking the revocation of their CUP. And at least one passionate attorney declared in front of you all that he vowed to defend and protect Brother Benno's. And the last but not least is that the cockroaches come out at night. Let's have some fun. I would ask, if I may, with your permission, ask commissioners, city planners, et cetera, if you've ever served breakfast at Brother Benno's, would you raise your hand? Have you ever taken a tour of Brother Benno's? Did that include the thrift shop on Mission? Across the street. Yeah, well, it's Mission. Yeah. That's wonderful. Physical security, I was struck by the fact that $175,000 was allocated apparently by Brother Benno's voluntarily for private security. Now, we all know that private security has about as much effectiveness as an elementary school crossing guard. So why are we spending, and if I was executive director of Brother Benno's, I'd say, wouldn't we be better off hiring some licensed clinical social workers? I think we could get some for that kind of money. In fact, Measure 10, or X, sometimes referred to, called for the hiring of a social worker to go hand in hand with the homeless outreach team. It's troubling, I find, sometimes to get a solution to understand why would this ad hoc committee, including some unknown people from the management team and Brother Benno's and whatnot, report to the chief of police? Shouldn't they actually report to the officer in charge of the hot team? Doesn't that make sense? The chief is too busy to spend time on Brother Benno. Anyway, these rent-a-cops, I just finished the Grapes of Wrath, and it just reminded me of the deputies rousting out those Okies. Can't keep here. Don't let the sun set on you in Tallahatchie County. We have our expectations. Is this what we want this private security to do? No. Social worker. Social worker could work with hand in hand with the homeless outreach team, the Measure X social worker, they could partner with the Regional Task Force on homelessness, the Oceanside Navigation Center. They'll take a walk-in. No, you've got to be referred. A rent-a-cop isn't capacitated to make a referral for housing. My good friend Eddie Bickham on the Housing Commission, who talks to whom around here? There's a new mental health stabilization unit, I understand, that's been created. They'll take walk-ins there. So I ask folks to actually talk and think these things out. We're a country of immediate satisfaction, and sometimes when we do that, we make mistakes. Sanitation, $50,000 allocated apparently for someone to pick up the trash. Consider this, gentlemen and gentlelady. What if we had Brother Benno's work with a social worker, hire out the sick, lame, and lazy, thank you, and allocate that money to pay them to pick up their own.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan. Any other slips?
That concludes our slips.
Great, thank you. Then we'll move on to approval of the minutes from our last meeting on September 11th. A motion or any discussion?
Motion to approve the minutes from last session.
Thank you. Motion by Commissioner Dodds to approve the minutes as they are. A second?
Second.
Second, Commissioner Malik. Let's vote.
Let the record show that the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Tonight's agenda on the consent calendar, we have nothing listed, and we do not have anything listed under transportation items, so we'll go to our public hearings items. We have one item this evening. Item 4 is consideration of a regular coastal permit to allow the interior remodel of an existing single-family resident at 1830. We'll do disclosures. Familiar with the area, did a quick drive-by and read the staff report. Vice Chair Morrissey?
Read the staff report, met the owner at the property today.
Great. Commissioner Dodds?
Read staff report and familiar with the area.
Commissioner Obama?
Staff report, familiar with the area, and I did a Google Maps search.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Malik?
I read the report, went by the property today, both the front and the back, to check it out.
Great, and Commissioner Anthony?
Read the report and familiar with the area.
Great, thank you. Mr. Elder, Shane Elder, welcome. Looks like the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Good evening, Chair Rosales and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Shane Elder, Planner 1 with the Planning Division. Tonight I'm here to present the request to approve regular coastal permit RC 23-00008 at 1830 South Pacific Street. The project site is a 6,002 square foot lot developed with an existing single-family residence. The site is located within the appeal jurisdiction of the coastal zone in the South Oceanside neighborhood planning area. The architecture of the single-family residence and detached two-car garage is defined by the use of red-brown wood side shingles and cream-colored stucco. The residence includes 2 second-floor balconies and 2 chimneys. The request for a regular coastal permit is to allow new exterior finishes on both the residence and detached garage, the relocation and/or replacement of windows and doors, the demolition of the west-facing chimney, the enclosure of the east-facing balcony to be converted to a closet, and the addition of a west-facing patio with railing. This site plan shows that the footprint of the residence and garage will not change aside from the minor alteration of the removed chimney. The proposed project retains greater than 50% landscaping in the front yard, a tree canopy of 8%, and permeable surface area of 32%. Visible in the west elevation, which is on the upper right here, is the removed chimney, which allows for more and larger windows that have access directly onto the new patio. Both elevations show the beige stucco, natural colored vertical wood paneling, and wood shingles stained beige in the proposal. If leaking, the existing wood shake roof will be replaced with black asphalt shingles. Visible in both of these elevations is the enclosed second-story balcony and alterations to the south-facing chimney, as well as the design elements previously mentioned, the beige and wood paneling. Consistent with the design scheme of the residence, garage renovations would include new exterior finishes, installation of a new garage door and window, and the possible roof replacement if leaking. The proposed project has been determined to be consistent with the architectural policies in the land use element. It also conforms to the local coastal program, as it has no effects on public coastal access or views, and is consistent with the eclectic neighborhood character of custom houses. Additionally, the proposed project also complies with development standards of the R1 zoning district. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission confirms issuance of a Class 1 categorical exemption per the California Environmental Quality Act, Article 19, Section 15301E, existing facilities. Staff also recommends approval of regular coastal permit RC 23-00008 by adopting Planning Commission Resolution number 2023-P21 with findings and conditions of approval attached therein. This concludes staff's presentation. Both I and the applicant are here for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Elder. Any questions for staff? Don't see any. Would the applicant like to come forward and add anything to the presentation? If not, thank you, Ms. Heineman. We'll go to the public. Any slips to speak on this item?
Chair Rosales, we do not have any slips on this item.
Great. Anybody in the audience like to come forward and address the commission on this item? Don't see anybody rushing forward, so we will close the public hearing. This is, this seems to be a pretty straightforward action on our part. I don't see anything that jumps out at me. Commissioners, any questions or anything that you'd like to raise? If not, then we can, I think, pretty quickly go to a motion. Mr. Morrissey, go ahead.
Well, I was going to make a motion, but unless...
Well, I was just going to compliment Ms. Hyman. I think if it's you that did the drawings, correct? I just thought that was so refreshing to see the way you did it. I'm an architect also, so I just really appreciated your hand in this and thought that was very, very cool. So thank you. I mean, thank you. I guess it's just a great presentation.
My motion is to adopt staff's recommendation to confirm issuance of a Class 1 CEQA facility pursuant to Section 15301 of the CEQA Act and approve coastal permit RC 23-8 by adopting the Planning Commission Resolution 2023-P21 with findings and conditions of approval attached therein.
Great. We have a motion by Vice Chair Morrissey. A second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Malik. Let's go ahead and vote.
Let the record show that the motion passes unanimously.
You, Mr. Elder, I presume you're a new staff member. I just want to warn you that they are not always this easy, so.
Project.
Yeah, very easy to support that one. Okay, that's the end of our public hearing items, but we do have a discussion item this evening. Mr. Cunningham is going to provide an update on Phase 2 of the general plan. Good evening, Russ.
Good evening, Chair Rosales and Commissioners. Yes, I am still employed with the City of Oceanside. If you have forgotten who I am, you're to be forgiven because I haven't been in front of this body for some time. I can tell you that I have been quite busy. I'm Russ Cunningham with the city's planning division, and I'm privileged to be managing the city's first ever comprehensive general plan update. We are in the second phase of this planning effort, and we're focused on the updating of 7 general plan elements and the preparation of several other complementary plans, including the Smart and Sustainable Corridors Specific Plan, the South Morrow Hills Community Plan, an updated Climate Action Plan, and 2 separate plans addressing active transportation, the Active Transportation Plan and the Trails Master Plan. So a lot of moving parts, some of which will move forward for adoption in the spring of next year, and others that are action items that will be pursued following adoption of the updated general plan, the Smart and Sustainable Corridors Specific Plan. This is fundamentally an information item, but we hope it will inspire some discussion among us. The commission is not being asked to take any formal action tonight or make a formal recommendation on any component of the general plan update this evening. But given that this body will ultimately do so, we wanted to check in with you and get you up to speed on our progress and next steps. This is also an opportunity for the community to learn more about the project and its purpose, its components, its timeline, et cetera. I would like to think that the absence of a large crowd tonight bodes well for the project, that it indicates that those who have participated in this effort, and there have been literally thousands of people who have participated in this effort, are generally comfortable with and supportive of the direction in which we are. So in my presentation tonight and our subsequent discussion, I want to talk about the progress that we've made and the challenges that we've overcome. I want to share some of the community concerns and priorities that are informing this project. I'll reiterate for you and for our newer commissioners, share with you for the first time the community vision, the guiding principles, the organizing themes, and the preferred plan that are all precursors to the primary deliverables here, those being the general plan elements and those complementary plans that I mentioned earlier. We'll talk about a couple of project components, particularly those that will come before this body in the spring of next year for a formal recommendation. I'll share next steps, and then as indicated in an email I sent to you early this afternoon, I do want to pose one question to you really for conversational purposes, and that is, how can we reinforce the organizing themes and realize the community vision? A very broad question that hopefully gives you a lot of space to ask questions or offer any suggestions you may. So some of you will recall that in 2019, this body recommended and the City Council subsequently approved the first phase of the general plan update. And that involved the preparation and introduction of 2 new optional general plan elements, the economic development element, or EDE, the energy and climate action element, the ECAE, and those were attended by the city's first climate action plan that I'll refer to going forward as the CAP. I think it's worth pointing out that there were quite a few overlapping goals and policies in these 3 documents. Maybe a better word would be intersecting and complementary goals and policies. And those included efficient land use, smart growth. A corollary of that is preservation of farmland and open space, a diverse and green economy, seeing what we can do to invite industries in key economic sectors to Oceanside to expand our employment base and our tax base, and what we can do to provide more local goods and services to our population. The city has a fairly significant retail leakage, meaning a lot of our residents go elsewhere to shop. What can we do about that? So these are issues that the economic development addresses. Expanding mobility options That includes expanding our active transportation infrastructure and transit service and linking those together. Regional collaboration, working with other cities in the North County that share similar challenges and opportunities, working with Sandag cooperatively, working with the County of San Diego and other entities in the region, and maybe to some extent moving away from the somewhat competitive dynamic that often exists between cities, particularly neighboring cities. And then finally, I'll mention, among other overlapping goals and policies, a desire on the part of the community to enhance visual character and to improve the city's brand, to more positively brand the city going forward. That speaks to enhancing Oceanside, not just as a visitor destination, but as a place that affords quality of life to our residents.
Hey, Russ, can I interrupt you for a minute? Are we going to do a more back and forth kind of? Do you want us to ask questions midway through? Or do you want to get through your presentation?
I appreciate that. And it might be kind of cool to have some back and forth. Now I'm happy to do that.
Okay. So commissioners, if you want to, at some point, just use your cue to chime in, and I'll recognize it if you want to ask Russ a question. I don't see anything right now.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So
and yeah, I'm happy to have this be more conversational.
Right.
Yeah, we don't have to wait till the end of my presentation by any means. So you can't read this. I can't read this. Nobody in here can read this, but you did receive this as an attachment to your hard copy memo, and hopefully that is more legible. And the reason I include it here is simply to let you know we are mindful of the project timeline. We are mindful of the schedule. And I want to start here because in some ways it's the elephant in the room. We had hoped to wrap this project up before the end of this year. We were thinking early this year originally. Things happen, right? So we kicked off this project in February of 2020. So almost 3.5 years ago. 3 weeks after that kickoff, we were in lockdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We had essentially a need to reinvent our community engagement plan to emphasize remote outreach and then establish this expectation with the community that we're not going to be having in-person events. This is going to be remote. It's going to be online, and we want to help you get up to speed, enhance your literacy, your digital literacy, so you can participate in these events. We had to find other ways to acquaint our consultant team with the conditions on the ground here in Oceanside, as they weren't able to physically come to Oceanside for nearly a year. Subsequent to kicking off the project, and this is good news, we were awarded 2 state grants totaling more than $800,000. This additional grant funding allowed us to expand the scope of the project in 3 ways. First, the expanded budget allowed us to turn the Smart and Sustainable Corridors Plan, originally intended as a policy document similar to the Coast Highway Vision and Strategic Plan that I think a number of you are familiar with, to turn that document into a regulatory document that will serve as the zoning for the project area, that will identify specific infrastructure improvements, and that will streamline the environmental review process for future development and capital improvement projects in that planning area. It will also streamline the development review process for these projects. Secondly, the additional funding allowed us to add an active transportation plan to our scope of work. The ATP will consolidate the city's pedestrian and bicycle master plans, and it will serve to implement general plan goals and policies, particularly those in the integrated mobility element. Finally, the additional funding allowed us to add a trails master plan, the TMP. The TMP is actually an action item that's called out in the recently, I say recently adopted, it's been a few years now, but the fairly recently adopted Parks and Recreation Master Plan, which calls upon the city to improve connections between parks and recreational facilities and the neighborhoods that they are intended to serve. So receipt of these grants was great, but it required grant agreements, it required a revision of our scope and budget, and it took some time. We think it was worth it. We've also faced considerable turnover among consultant team members, as well as the need to reassign certain planning division staff who were originally part of our GPU team, but had to take on development review responsibilities and other tasks when we lost planning staff to retirement and to other job opportunities. All of that said, the most significant impact on our project timeline has been the delay in completing regional traffic modeling associated with Sandag's regional plan. Because the Sandag Board of Directors voted against the road user fee, the infamous road user fee, they kind of threw Sandag staff for a loop with that. That fee was integrated into the first iteration of the traffic model, and that model had to be updated, had to be modified. So local jurisdictions, we rely on the regional traffic model to assess local traffic impacts and VMT, vehicle miles traveled, associated with both new development and with long-range planning projects. So without that model, we can't effectively assess roadway level of service, projected VMT, and other impacts associated with traffic, and those include air quality, GHG emissions, and noise. So as a result of the need to modify the regional traffic model, we were forced to wait nearly a year to conduct our own local traffic modeling. The good news is we kept working on other components of the project, and further good news, that model was delivered, and we have used it to assess traffic here in Oceanside, and the results of that and the analysis of those outputs will be in my hands very shortly.
Russ, can I interrupt and ask a question?
Absolutely.
I see in the staff report that the ATP and the TMP are going to be prepared subsequent to the adoption of these elements we see in the project timeline here. Do you have kind of a relative idea of what that timeline might be for those two elements, or is that to be determined later on?
I don't have a timeline, but I will say this about those two components. I think they will move relatively quickly in that a lot of the content for the ATP, for example, exists in the pedestrian master plan and the bicycle master plan. There will certainly be changes and updates, but one of the fundamental goals here is to consolidate those plans, which to us makes imminent sense, that it's all active transportation. And I think it will help us identify and create better linkages between pedestrian facilities and bike amenities. I would hope that within a year of the adoption of the general plan, we will have those documents in place, if not sooner.
Yeah, you're not starting from scratch. You have a lot of it already built or analyzed or whatnot. Okay.
Yeah, that's
Great.
right.
Thank
That's
you.
right. And with respect to the Trails Master Plan, we have some amazing trails here in Oceanside. We've got the River Trail, of course. The Coastal Rail Trail is almost entirely built out. If we can get that bridge over Loma Alta Creek. We're also looking to get the Inland Rail Trail implemented in the Oceanside Boulevard corridor within perhaps within the Sprinter right-of-way, perhaps via other alignments. Very good news there that I think will help move the TMP forward more quickly, and that is we just received grant funding to pay for an alignment study to determine just what's feasible in terms of how that trail will run through the city of Oceanside. You probably know it's already largely implemented in the other Highway 78 jurisdictions, all the way out to Escondido. So we're kind of the final link in a trail that will connect Escondido with the beach, which is pretty exciting.
Great, thank you.
I have a little comment.
Go ahead.
With the trail system, because I know I was looking at some of the Southmore Hills Community Plan elements that are on your, also in the same website, and there's a really robust trail system proposed there also. So once the Southmore Hills Community Plan gets implemented, the trail system can go from the river all the way to the top of the Sleeping Indian and down, which I think that'd be a great, like, hiking great thing for the whole community to be able to experience. We just have to get that part of the master plan finished, so we can get that part in.
Absolutely. And that connection to North River Road and future improvements thereof will provide, I think, opportunities for cyclists to head further east, out towards the unincorporated communities of Bonsall, et cetera. And who knows, maybe someday we have a dedicated bike trail that extends all the way to Interstate 50.
That'd be great.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to provide just a little General Plan 101, and think of this as an investment in that if I share it with you tonight, I will not have to share it with you again, like when I come back before you next year for your formal recommendation. So why are we doing this? Well, I think we're doing it for the betterment of the city. I think we have very intrinsic reasons to be doing this, but state law requires that all cities and all counties adopt and periodically update general plans. So I'll quote from state law. Each city and county in California shall adopt and periodically update a general plan for the physical development of the county or city and any land outside its boundaries which in the planning agency's judgment bears relation to its planning. So what they mean by that is when you prepare a general plan, you should be looking not only at your incorporated boundaries, but you should be looking at your sphere of influence. I'm here to tell you, if you don't already know this, Oceanside has no sphere of influence. We have Camp Pendleton in the north, we got the Pacific Ocean out here, Carlsbad over here, just unincorporated communities that like being unincorporated communities for the most part. And so that's not something we frankly have to trouble ourselves with in this process or really forward. So there are required elements, and it's important to recognize that when the state uses the term elements, they really mean topics. They don't prescribe how those topics are represented, how they're combined or not combined with other topics, but they use this word element, and that's typically the term that we use for the different components of the general plan. So those required elements, those required topics are land use, circulation, housing, conservation, open space, safety, noise, environmental justice, air quality, and for cities that are next to military installations, can you think of a city that's near a military installation? They need to prepare an element, they need to address the topic of their adjacency to that military facility. So these are all topics that we are addressing in this document, in some cases voluntarily, and I'll speak to that more in a moment. All of these elements or topics and the policies and goals established for them have to be internally consistent. So you can't say things in terms of land use. You can't establish land use policies that conflict with transportation policies or with conservation policies. The state allows cities and counties to adopt optional elements, and this city has done that. We have a community facilities element that dates to 1990 that addresses how the city will provide high-quality facilities and services to the community. That's not required by the state of California, but it's something we're for in this update. The state guidelines talk about other considerations and sort of hint at, suggest that cities address these other considerations in their general plan elements, and that includes public health, climate change, and economic development. As you know, we have an economic development element, we have a climate action plan, and we will be addressing public health across the elements, particularly in the healthy and livable communities. No. So sometimes you'll hear that a general plan is a constitution for a city. Sometimes you'll hear the term blueprint. It's a constitution in the sense that it establishes goals and policies that guide future decision-making, and it holds decision makers accountable for consistent decision-making. In these realms, development review, with respect to capital improvements, with respect to programs initiated by different disciplines, and with respect to budgeting, with respect to how the city determines how to spend its money, or taxpayers' money. It's also a blueprint in that it identifies where future development and capital improvements will occur and where open space will be, et cetera. So the general plan will have an updated land use map. You've seen that in presentations that you've been given in staff reports. There'll be an excerpt often from the general plan land use map showing you the land use designation of that property. We'll have mapping for the circulation network and roadway classifications within that network. We'll have mapping for open space and natural habitat that will support an ongoing inventory that will be managed over time. Hazard maps that speak to the city's vulnerability to natural hazards. So there's general plan update 101. So what progress have we made despite the challenges that I mentioned to you earlier? We engaged in about 18 months of community engagement, technical studies, field work, and assessment of state and regional priorities. We developed a community vision with organizing themes and guiding principles. We prepared a policy framework for the South Morrill Hills Community Plan. So this is where I need to note that while the community plan was moving along concurrently with other components of this project, because our outreach, our forums on the community plan, in fact, our outreach on all components of the general plan update were being completely subsumed by concerns about South Morrill Hills area. We determined that the only way we were going to bring attention to the other components of the project was to separate the community plan from the rest of the project. And that's what we've done, which isn't to say we've forgotten about it in any way. In fact, city staff was working with the Mission Conservation District to submit a grant, submit for a state grant to prepare an action plan that would primarily address the economic viability of farming in South Morrill Hills and speak a little bit to agritourism, speak a little bit to succession planning. We got ahead of ourselves a little bit, and there were South Morrill Hills community members that were concerned that they hadn't been notified that we were going down that path. So we decided to postpone that and think about submitting for that grant next year. But I just mentioned that because I want you to know that it remains in the forefront of our minds. We completed a smart and sustainable corridors conceptual plan, and that is available on our webpage. onwardoceanside.com is our webpage. If you haven't been, please visit that page. There's a wealth of information there. And as Commissioner Ballman mentioned to me just a moment ago in a sidebar, there's also illustrative material in there that this presentation isn't at all illustrative. But if you go on our website, you'll, I think, get a better visual of where we're heading with this project and its various components. The housing element was adopted by our city council on September 9th. I want to congratulate my colleague, Rob Dmuchowski, who managed that project through a lot of challenges, a lot of hurdles. And that's a big deal. That unlocks a bunch of funding for the city and lets us move on to other important matters. We have completed, for the most part, administrative drafts of 6 updated, that should say updated, not update, 6 updated general plan elements, and we'll identify those in a moment. We've completed an administrative draft of the Smart and Sustainable Corridors specific plan. That's the regulatory document I mentioned earlier that leverages the conceptual plan to essentially create a document that will be the zoning for our inland commercial corridors. And we've also initiated environmental review, the draft environmental impact report. So some of the considerations that we have been mindful of and that have informed this project include federal and state and regional priorities. We have to align with the state. We have to align with regional planning efforts. And to the extent that we want federal funding, we have to align with federal priorities. So some of those include the issues of environmental justice and social equity, climate change and how we mitigate climate change and how we adapt to climate change, how we address the housing crisis. The housing crisis has led to a lot of state preemption of our local land use authority, those raft of housing laws that have kind of changed the landscape for us in terms of what the city can and cannot regulate with respect to housing. Commissioner or Chair?
Yes, I had a question around that. So the city council adopted the housing element September 9th, and I'm glad you have this bullet point in there. How did the state preemption of local control play into that updated housing element? Did it not? Did it influence it? Were the outcomes different than when we started the process in 2020? Just a quick overview. You don't need to go into detail.
Yeah, I can speak to one pretty fundamental and significant way in which these preemptions have impacted our assumptions about how housing is going to get produced and what pace and over what period of time. So it used to be that accessory dwelling units in Oceanside required a conditional use permit. That's no longer the case because the state does not allow cities to subject ADUs to that process. Subsequent to that, we saw a lot of relaxation coming from the state of development standards. And that has completely changed the landscape in terms of what is possible with respect to ADUs. So we went from getting literally a half a dozen ADU applications a year to now getting, I think, close to 100, city planner? Yeah.
Over 100.
Over 100 annually. So what state law allows is for us to carry that trend forward. So in light of our RHNA, our regional housing needs allocation of roughly 5,300 units, we can assume that some of that obligation will be met by accessory dwelling units on the order of 100 plus a year over the next planning cycle, which we're currently in the 8-year cycle that goes from 2021 to 20. We didn't make a lot of assumptions about SB 9 and how that is going to provide additional units. Sergio, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on how housing.
Outside of Commissioner or Chair Rosales and Planning Commissioners, outside of the two topics that Russ hit on, the state preemption really didn't influence the crafting of the housing element, and there's really no policies that speak to those preemptions from the state within the housing element.
Yeah, great, and that's kind of what I was looking for. Thanks, Russ.
And you're probably familiar with some of the other laws that are meant to streamline the process or lock in fees, things like that. That is all meant to produce more housing. So while it's not necessarily acknowledged in the housing element, as the state views it, this is reducing constraints to housing. Should mean that more housing gets developed in Oceanside and in the region. Thanks for that question, Chair Rosales. Sandag's 5 big moves. Let's see if I can recite those. So complete corridors, mobility hubs, transit leap, flexible fleets, and next OS, or next operating system. We want to be aligned with that so that we are eligible for funding at the regional level for transportation improvements. Both the federal government and the state government have set a goal of called 30 by 30 of formally preserving, and it's a very ambitious goal that probably doesn't get realized by 2030, but the goal is to essentially formally conserve 30% of our land area nationally and within the state, formally conserve open space, sensitive habitat, farmland within that period of time. So incredibly ambitious. And where does that happen? It happens at the local level. So it's something that we need to be mindful of. Infrastructure. The federal government has made a huge investment in infrastructure, and we want to get a piece of that pie. And the expansion of the zero emission vehicle fleet. We want to make sure that in Oceanside, people who drive zero emission vehicles have practical, convenient, and affordable ways to charge those vehicles. With respect to community concerns at the grassroots, housing access, housing affordability, and we really think we've struck kind of a grand bargain with members of the community who are not particularly enamored with the idea of change or growth or more housing. I think a lot of folks have come to recognize that the opportunities that were afforded to them are opportunities that should be afforded to future generations, and that if the city can truly facilitate housing that provides for the entire socioeconomic spectrum, not just above moderate and moderate, but lower income and even very low income housing, then the community, from what we've gathered over 18 months of outreach, the community is okay with that, recognizing the need and trusting that the city will pursue opportunities to provide housing across that spectrum. And then beach loss and coastal hazards, we're addressing this in our local coastal program. I don't know how many of you made the acquaintance of Jamie Timberlake, our new coastal administrator, but Jamie is shepherding a very ambitious project to restore and maintain beach in Oceanside, and we want to make sure that we have general plan policies that support her work and the work of others. Farmland preservation, a big issue, and the economic viability of farming, a big issue. Those go hand in hand. The integrity of single-family neighborhoods. Now, we talked a moment ago about these state preemptions that make it harder for the city to preclude certain types of development in single-family neighborhoods. And frankly, there's not a lot we can do about that. But we're not looking to exacerbate that in any way. So you're not going to see a lot of change in terms of local policies, local goals, policies, and standards for single-family neighborhoods in an effort to maintain the integrity of those areas as much as possible. First mile, last mile mobility challenges. There are a lot of barriers to mobility, active transportation in Oceanside, topography, human-made boundaries. The fact that we butt up against an ocean and a military complex. So overcoming those challenges, getting people, for example, from their home to a transit station, or getting them from their home to a commercial venue, a shopping venue, getting them downtown. We've heard from the senior community in areas like Oceana that they would love to have a shuttle that in the summertime gets them to the beach and back. And I think we're making progress on that with our Go Side shuttle in the downtown area, which is in its second piloting phase. And hopefully at some point we don't call it a pilot anymore.
Russ, I'm going to let Commissioner Malik jump in with a question.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Going back to the integrity of single-family neighborhoods, that's probably the most, one of the most prevalent issues that we deal with as a planning commission, because the conditional use permits associated with them. And I think we all feel that we have a desire to maintain that integrity of those single-family home neighborhoods. You mentioned, and we understand the impact of state regulations that make it very difficult to do that. But while you said we're trying to maintain that integrity, and with the existing policies that we have, is what, if anything, can we do to strengthen that? Because as we look at it, and probably at least 50, if not more % of the issues that we deal with, I believe, have very much to do with that issue right there. And when you live in a community, and we had some very unhappy people here at one of our previous sessions that are, they feel that they don't have any input to what's going on, and we feel the same way. We're very hamstrung. So I'm curious to know what we could potentially look at in that concern, or is there anything to look at that you're looking at to strengthen, not maintain, but strengthen that ability to keep that integrity there, given the challenges with the state?
I appreciate the question, Commissioner. I know it's an abiding concern in our community, particularly those residing in these single-family neighborhoods. And it's something that planning staff has given a lot of thought to, and we continue to give a lot of thought to it. I think you've seen that with density bonus, there's not a lot of discretion on the part of the city to condition those projects or deny those projects. So in that space, I'm not sure that there's a great deal that we can do. What some cities have done with the advent of SB 9 and ADU legislation that makes it easier to develop those types of units is the preparation of objective design standards. The reality is, though, most of our development standards are objective. They're quantifiable. You can go this high. You can go this close to the property line, et cetera. If there's an interest in issues beyond, say, the bulk and scale of development, and maybe related to architecture, specifically related to a certain character or style of development, and there are some neighborhoods in Oceanside that reflect that, that's something that we can consider going forward. And I don't know, with density bonus, it might be challenging, but with respect to SB 9 development and other development that isn't invoking state preemptions of local land use authority, that could come in handy.
Commissioner Malik, I'll add that in the grand scheme of things and the work that Russ is doing, one way we're preserving the integrity of these neighborhoods is by not really projecting growth in them. We're not counting on the neighborhoods to accommodate our growth. Rather, we're counting on the transit corridors, Mission Avenue, Oceanside Boulevard, Vista Way, to accommodate our future growth. And we have a sites inventory that's part of the housing element that proves that we have that ability to accommodate our future growth, our 5,000 plus units within these corridors without really needing to rely on the neighborhoods to account for some of that growth. So that's probably the biggest major thing that we're doing to make sure that the integrity of the neighborhoods are being preserved.
I so appreciate that input. I think that's much more useful than what I shared. So just to reiterate that, there's nothing in our housing element, in our housing sites inventory, in our smart and sustainable corridors plan that proposes to densify single-family neighborhoods. And to the contrary, we are looking, as Sergio says, we're looking to accommodate our growth in our commercial corridors, by and large. And that's something we want to signal to the development community going forward. So to some extent, that is going to relieve that development pressure, right, on the single-family neighborhoods, or we hope that it does going forward. So habitat conservation is a big concern of a pretty large cross-section of our community interested in restoring and preserving our riparian corridors. We have some amazing riparian areas in Oceanside, but many of them are degraded and could use a little love. The wildlife corridor planning zone cuts through the city along the high voltage transmission line, and that is established in the regional habitat plan as a corridor that connects habitat in Carlsbad to habitat on Camp Pendleton. So we want to do what we can to create contiguous habitat within that planning zone. Other considerations or concerns that were expressed by the community, I think it's worth noting those so folks know that we've been listening. Homelessness. And we will have policies on this issue in the healthy and livable community element. Water supply. We're generally in pretty good shape when it comes to water supply. And so I think a lot of that is education, helping people understand our water resources and how we're ensuring that we have those resources going forward. Traffic safety, particularly in residential areas. There's concern about cut-through traffic and speeding in residential neighborhoods. Our hospitality sector and how that is interfacing with our efforts to promote quality of life. So I think many of you, maybe all of you know Leslie Gall with Visit Oceanside. She is developing a really ambitious plan, the Sustainable Tourism Plan. And that is an important component of that plan. How do we promote tourism? How do we build Oceanside as a visitor destination and do it in a way that enhances and doesn't detract from the quality of life of residents. So it's great to know that our tourist arm is very mindful of that consideration, and we'll have policies in the general plan to that effect. And then, of course, climate mitigation and adaptation. So here's the community vision in a nutshell. The city will, are there other questions?
Well, yeah, I was just going to say,
go ahead.
you brought up Leslie Gall and Visit Oceanside, and further back in your presentation, you talked a little bit about branding and marketing the city, making sure we have a brand and are projecting Oceanside. Visit Oceanside is amazing with what they do in marketing and with branding, and I think that the city should join with them a little bit on that rather than come up with another brand, another idea, and just join together with her and her team that are just phenomenal and work out your Oceanside branding with her and their team, because they're just, like, I serve on that board and it's just amazing what they do, and I'm sure you know what they do. So rather than come up with another logo or another idea, work together.
We are on that page, Commissioner Balma.
Excellent.
Just earlier last week, I met with CJ Demento, our chief librarian, to talk about this very issue, and we're sitting down with Leslie, Michelle Geller, our economic development manager, and Scott Ashton at the chamber, and probably Gumaro as well at Main Street Oceanside, to talk about this very thing. We don't need 5 different entities having 5 different brands.
Right.
That create this visual clutter.
Excellent.
So, yeah, we're on that.
Okay.
Thank you. So the community vision, in essence, the city will accommodate anticipated housing and employment growth in ways that promote quality of life, public health and safety, economic diversity, environmental quality, social equity, and state and regional priorities like the ones that we just spoke about. This is essentially what people in our line of work often call the triple bottom line. Economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and social sustainability, and how you bring those things together. How environmental efforts can promote your economy, and how you can grow your economy by doing the right things to lift up your population, provide workforce training, things of that sort, so that you have a workforce that brings employers to the city of Oceanside. So that all those things, those 3 components work together. And interestingly, that is, whether the community was conscious of it or not, that's essentially what the community is asking for, that triple bottom line. So these are the general plan elements that we're updating. And we are utilizing the organizing themes that are expressed in the vision to entitle these elements. So what we're trying to do here is essentially signal the purpose and intent of each element and to reflect the community values and priorities related to that element through these titles. So our titles are efficient and compatible land use element, the ECLU. Get used to the acronyms. The integrated mobility element, the IM, the remarkable community element, the RC, the safe and resilient environment element, the SRE, the vital and sustainable resources element, the VSR, and the healthy and livable community element, the HLC. So efficient and compatible land use replaces our land use element. And as this language signals, we're looking to utilize our precious and limited land resources more efficiently. The integrated mobility element is looking to integrate all modes of transportation as seamlessly as possible. The remarkable community is an optional element that we're pretty excited about, and it asks the question, what is remarkable about Oceanside? And how can we protect and enhance those assets that make Oceanside a unique and special community? So we're addressing historic resources in this element. We're addressing tribal resources, cultural resources in this element. And we're also addressing urban design in this element. The city does not have presently goals and policies related to urban design. So we're really looking to step up the expectations for both private development and what we're able to accomplish in the public realm to render the city more attractive, more functional, more walkable, and more desirable and more safe. Speaking of safety, the safe and resilient environment element will address the state mandated topic of safety. And in line with Senate Bill 379, it looks at how natural hazards are likely to be or have already been exacerbated by climate change and what we can do about that in terms of adapting such that we become more resilient to those natural hazards. So we're talking about flooding, we're talking about fire, we're talking about sea level rise, we're talking about drought, we're talking about, this isn't really related to climate change, but we're talking about seismic events and geological hazards. That's all addressed in the SRE, along with human-induced hazards like hazardous waste and the potential for hazardous waste and spillage. The vital and sustainable resources element addresses the state-prescribed topics of conservation and open space, and the healthy and livable community element, as I alluded to earlier, replaces the community facilities element. So it addresses community facilities and services, but it also addresses other really important topics like civic engagement and how we make our decision-making process more transparent and more inclusive. The Smart and Sustainable Corridors plan is largely supported by a grant from Caltrans through their Sustainable Communities program. What I meant to mention earlier in the context of the integrated mobility element is that Caltrans is not that interested in building new roads, and they're not that interested in expanding existing roadways. They recognize if the state is going to meet a lot of its goals, it can't do that because that is traffic inducing. Yes, we're likely to get an expansion of I-5 through the City of Oceanside, primarily for the purpose of providing dedicated lanes for HOVs, including express bus service going forward. But generally speaking, Caltrans is getting out of that business of building more and larger roads. And that's signaled by this Sustainable Communities program. As far as our roadway network is concerned, we don't have room for very many more roads. And our right-of-way is such that there's very little opportunity to implement additional lanes or other ways to accommodate vehicle traffic. So the intention of this grant is to encourage cities to render their corridors more complete, more walkable, more bikeable, and denser, accommodating housing in commercial corridors, and finding that balance, that synergy between housing and the commercial sector. Are there other questions?
Not right now.
Yeah, indeed.
I would say that is a challenge because when you look at that increased housing, especially along the coast, let's take Coast Highway as an example, where you've got 1- and 2-story buildings along that, along most of it from Oceanside Boulevard south. We see 3+ story structures going in with multiple dwelling units. And so while we're trying to accommodate increased growth, increased population, the cars aren't going to go away. They're simply not. So you're going to see increased noise with 3-story buildings on either side of that street. A lot more density that's really talk about preserving the character of neighborhoods, not very welcomed by the people that live there. And you're going to see the sun go down at 2 p.m. If you're on the east side of the street, and an increased level of noise from the reverberation of traffic and all that. It's just that's the way it's looking to be developing. So I understand where your position is and what you're having to deal with. It's just it's a frustration for many who live in the community that don't want to see too much of the character change. They're not averse to growth and development, but when we see building heights going up and buildings going right out to the edge of the sidewalk with really no setback, it's challenging for those that live there. I don't need you to come back with anything. It's just really a comment.
And I appreciate it. It's a segue into the next point, which is that we are, to some extent, riffing on the Coast Highway Incentive District and the complete streets improvements that are moving along. I would say to your comments, Commissioner Malik, that we believe that there'll be a reduction in traffic noise because anybody who's spent any time on Coast Highway knows that we get people driving at excessive speeds. That will be very difficult, if not impossible, to do under the complete streets improvements. We've also heard a lot from folks that they don't enjoy spending time on Coast Highway. That is changing with the adaptive reuse of existing buildings and new restaurants and cool spaces coming along, and that's wonderful. But it still has a starkness and sort of a desolate quality to it in certain stretches that discourage people from activating those streets and putting eyes on those streets. So that's part of the vision, is getting people out in those spaces.
One more question or comment, Commissioner Dodds, go ahead.
Is there any consideration for emergency evac areas, evac paths for areas like Sophomore Hills and those areas where they were almost isolated because of fires?
Appreciate the question, Commissioner Dodds. Yes, we will be addressing evacuation routes in the safe and resilient environment element. And you probably know this, but with respect to what happened, I think in 2017 with the Lilac Fire, it's pretty universally, I think, acknowledged now that, and it wasn't the city, it was other public safety entities that issued extremely broad evacuation orders that in retrospect didn't make a lot of sense and put a lot of people on the road at once. So we've learned from that. The regional apparatus has learned from that as well. Any other questions?
Not right now. Keep going.
Yeah. So our planning area is Mission Avenue, Oceanside Boulevard, Vista Way, largely east of Interstate 5 and the commercial properties that line those roadways. So we're looking to promote, as we are in the Coast Highway Corridor, pedestrian-oriented mixed-use development without taking away opportunities for industrial development where that's appropriate, enhancing the public realm with a number of improvements. You're going to see more paseos and courtyards, linear parks, enhanced sidewalks, more shade elements, things that bring people out into these spaces. And I really should have shared pictures of what this looks like in other communities that have achieved this and how activating it is when it is achieved. And then finally, connections between these corridors and the neighborhoods, the adjacent neighborhoods, open space areas, recreational facilities, and trails. So the third component that will come before you next year will be the updated Climate Action Plan. Why is it being updated? It's only been, 4 years? Here's why. We now have a general plan that is identifying housing and job growth specifically. So those of you who were here to review and provide a recommendation on the community vision and the alternatives report will remember that we're estimating an additional 17,000 housing units between now and 2050 and on the order of 21,000 additional jobs in Oceanside over that period of time. That's significant growth. So what are the emissions associated with that? That's something we have to address, and that's not addressed in the current Climate Action Plan. There are new state emissions reduction targets, and they're more aggressive than they were when we prepared the original plan. We're looking to get to net zero emissions by 2045 now. Implementation of the Climate Action Plan has been very difficult. And that's because we were very optimistic and assumed we had the resources to create all these new programs. Well, we don't have those resources. Even if we, and I hope we will, hire a sustainability manager to address both the Climate Action Plan and maybe sensitive habitat preservation, et cetera, undertake other sustainability initiatives, we will not have the capacity to establish a bunch of new programs. So what we're looking to do is work within the city's existing processes to implement new measures that reduce emissions. And this may mean more mandates on new development, but we want to couple that with information about how those mandates result in positive returns on investment. And the state requires that. So we cannot implement an ordinance that isn't cost effective, that doesn't show that that investment in that improvement, maybe it's a heat pump water heater, that doesn't pay off in the long run, that there isn't cost savings that easily amortizes the cost of investment. And then finally, social equity. We got dinged by folks in the region for not really addressing social equity in the context of climate. How is that going to promote jobs for folks throughout Oceanside at all socioeconomic levels, for example? How are we going to make, say, rooftop solar accessible to lower income households, things like that? Those are the kinds of things we need to address in this update. And then what are the emission sectors that we're looking at in the CAP? So there's transportation. Over 50% of our emissions come from private vehicle transportation. We have limited ability at the local level to address that. There are ways in which we can make headway. Building energy. So we have a building stock that, some of which goes back to the 40s, right? Isn't necessarily the most energy efficient development. So that's an opportunity. What can we do within the existing housing stock to reduce energy use and associated emissions? Land use, and you're going to really see that in the corridors plan, in the efficient and compatible land use element, and in the integrated mobility element, that we're linking transportation and land use together, making sure that those are syncing, and creating an environment that reduces auto dependence through our land use planning and our transportation planning, and bringing those two elements together. And then the last of these, which doesn't have as much a potential for emissions reduction as the other three, but is important to mention because this is where the city, through its own operations, can make a difference, and that's with water and with solid waste. And we have a very aggressive, a very vanguard water utilities department here that's doing some amazing things. You know about pure water, you know about the zero waste plan. These are things that we're doing, and I think those things set a positive example for the community at large. The city should be doing the things that it expects the rest of the community to do, and I think we're doing. So our next steps are to issue a survey on climate change and climate mitigation, how we reduce emissions, to get input from the community on this updated climate action plan, to prepare a public review draft of the Smart and Sustainable Corridors specific plan, and we're almost there. I received it just before this meeting. I received the last chapter for my review. We're going to conduct a community open house on the corridors plan in late October or early November, so I hope you can attend. We need to prepare public review drafts of the updated general plan elements, and that will be for public review. I kind of mangled that in this bullet point. I apologize for that. We are in the midst of, as I said, preparing the environmental document, and now that we have that traffic information, we can really hit that component of the project hard. Question?
Is on your EIR report you guys are working on, is that going to include the Southmore Hills Community Plan within that same study?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So one thing we're doing there, Commissioner Balma, is assuming that under current zoning, we will see a fair amount of housing development in that area, and we will see a fair amount of Tier 1 agritourism come along. Whether that's the case or not is arguable and an open question. But in assuming that, that means the delta between what we assume in this environmental document and where we probably end up with a community plan will be small, which means we should be able to really streamline the environmental review for the community plan and save time and expedite that planning process. We're going to hold public hearings, as I mentioned, in the spring of next year with you. You'll make a formal recommendation to the City Council. We'll cross our fingers that that's a positive one, and get those components adopted, and then move on to pursuing those action items that I mentioned, the community plan for Southmore Hills, a zoning ordinance update, and that will be guided by our land use element, the ATP, and the TN. So I appreciate that there's been some back and forth here. That's great. Hopefully there can be a little bit more. I want to go back to that question of how we can reinforce the organizing themes, realize this community vision, and there are our organizing themes there. So, and don't feel compelled to speak to this specific. Whatever questions or comments you have are most welcome.
Jump on in, Commissioner
All right.
Obama.
I just, my first comment basically is just kind of like how I know everyone talks about preserving farmland. You've said a million different ways inside of your presentation. I just wonder how serious the city really is with that, because that's preserving farmland's one thing, but preserving the farmer is how you have farmland. You don't have farmland without a farmer, and you know what's going on out there as far as all the stuff that's happening. The number one thing that really killed us this year in avocados was the importing of avocados from other countries that pretty much gave us nothing this year for our avocados. So we basically paid to grow 25 acres of avocados. I don't know how much longer we can do that. Other people that have larger amounts maybe can sustain it by doing different things, but that's pretty harsh. So you can't really help us with that, with importing. Maybe you can, talk to some of those people in Sacramento, and labor costs is another thing you really can't help us with. But you can help us, as you said, you have lots of water in the city. Well, our water rates are going to go up, I think, 6%. Well, that to a farmer is going to be another death. So water rates is a big deal for farmers, and that's something the city can help us with. But the other thing I just heard about from Sacramento was they're going to be issuing grants to cities to plant trees in cities. Why not plant trees on farmland? Like, avocados, citrus, macadamia nuts, mangoes. There's so many trees you can plant that also sustain carbon and do a good thing for our environment. So why not put that? I don't understand why the people in Sacramento don't think that same way, because there's a lot of farmers in the Central Valley that could use that money to plant trees that you can eat the food off of, rather than just plant trees that are in a street that you have to maintain and water, that is just useless. So to me, I don't understand why our government can't figure something out so we can continue to grow food in California. Because right now, the path we're on with farming in California, it's not good. So I don't know how much longer it's going to work. Because, anyway, so just kind of my little soapbox. So this first thing, efficient and compatible land use. If you really want to preserve farmland, let's try to work on some really hard things like water, and maybe get this idea of grants for trees to maybe kind of help us out with farming. The idea of these land banks and land trusts to buy land, what they're trying to do is have the farmland bought for instead of selling it for $200,000 an acre, we're going to sell it for $1,000 an acre. It's who in Southmore Hills is going to do that? I don't know anybody. So I think it's kind of it's a great idea. I wish it would happen, but that's people that have hundreds of thousands of acres in the middle of nowhere that do that, not in the middle of where we live. So I just think we need to get more serious on, if you want to preserve farmland, let's work together and try to really do it, because I think Southmore Hills really wants to farm out there. All the farmers want to continue farming. No one doesn't want to farm. They don't want to blanket the place with houses. They want to see farmland, number one. Agritourism is a way, possibly. So we got to get serious with this Southmore Hills Community Plan and get this thing through so that farmers can do something different. They can maybe continue their farming. And maybe with more agritourism that's a little bit more robust, they can do that. Not the housing thing we don't want to talk about that. We hope that doesn't even happen. We just want to see something happen for them, that they can actually continue to bring us food.
Well, first, if I could, thank you for your leadership and your advocacy in this area and what you've taught me and others about the dynamic in Southmore Hills. I think you invented the pegboard term, which has really informed the way we look at that area and what its future might be. So, and we look forward to continue to work with you, Commissioner, on these issues. Yes, there are certain things we can't help with. Foreign competition is probably one of those. Water is an area where we probably can. And that's a very clever idea regarding the tree planting. I wouldn't say that planting trees in urban environments is useless. I think there are many, many, many good reasons to plant trees in urban environments. But I think that's really a spectacular idea and something we should look into.
Southmore Hills is an urban environment, pretty much. We're surrounded by community. So to give us more trees and more money to plant more trees, and that's a way we can help us,
Can I talk about water here for a second?
Can.
Thank you. So going on your point of water, I was the chief of staff for Camp Pendleton for 2 years a while ago. Understand environmental challenges and all that, but we had a robust outflow from Camp Pendleton that came through the city of Oceanside to the ocean. With the significant amount of tertiary and above treatment plants that we are now bringing online, is there any discussion with Camp Pendleton about the use of their outfall to potentially increase our water supply and do some other things that maybe we can collaborate with? It goes into your military installations bullet that you have there, where I think we do have a mutual sphere of influence when you look at what the base offers the community. I think it's about, I can't remember the numbers. I had the numbers off the top of my head at one point in terms of the economic impact that the base provides the community. But when it comes to resources, they've also got 80 to 85% of the water rights to the San Luis Rey River. Certainly it needs to continue to flow to the ocean, we know that, but is there any mutual supportive things that we could potentially do? Just an idea, and I don't know how much, if any, that's been explored. I know that the two water districts, or the water district here and the water authority on the base, have had a fairly close relationship over the years, but I'm not sure what it is today. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. To the extent that I've been involved in coordination with Camp Pendleton, it's been on some transportation issues, and most recently on the community choice aggregation phenomenon, which is cities, counties moving away from investor-owned utilities and basically creating their own utility and sourcing their own electricity. So the City of Oceanside will be an active member of the Clean Energy Alliance with the cities of Carlsbad,
Vista,
all of the 78 cities.
7A corridor.
And I believe Solana Beach is in that group. And we had early in that process, this goes back a couple of years, but we had reached out to Camp Pendleton to see if there was an interest on their part in joining that CCA. What we learned is that, and I'm probably not telling you anything you don't know, but what we learned is that Camp Pendleton is powered by completely well, it's arguable, right, with the droughts and the cycles that we have, but almost all of their power comes from hydro, which is considered emissions-free and renewable, as long as you can keep water flowing behind the dam, right, and then through the dam.
You know, the state's dismantling dams at this point, so I don't know if we're going to be able to get there from here, but that's just an editorial comment, sorry.
Yeah, and I think there's...
I think that there may be some opportunities to explore there that maybe haven't been looked at or looked at in a long time, and water being one of them. There's no reason to just put outfall into a river if we can capture it, if it's not already being recaptured again. Because when I was there, we brought the first tertiary treatment plant online in the county, and I'm sure that we can do better than even that. So, some thoughts.
I have a contact on base, Sam Jamal, and I'll be reaching out to him on this. So thank you.
Tell him I said hello. I know.
Will do.
If you need any help with that, I'm happy to help at all.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Commissioner Anthony, question, comment?
So one of the things that businesses are talking about, I know the business that I work for, is the purple pipe. I know we've always talked about that, but we're going to get it, we're going to get it. That's one of the things I know that could benefit as far as water use is the purple pipe. The company I work for, we discharge about 6,500 gallons of water a day in our process that just goes down the tube. And if that water is treated, because the water that we actually discharge is cleaner than the water we get. But if that water is treated and put back into the system where we can use it, I mean, right there you have, solutions. I know that there are initiatives for that, but it seems to be slow coming, and I don't hear a lot about it. So, want to kind of know what you guys are doing about that, if you know anything about that.
Thank you, Commissioner, and it's a pleasure to make your acquaintance. I think it's the first time we've interacted.
Yes.
So at one point, the city was requiring new development to install the purple pipe. Water Utilities has gone to an in lieu fee. And the idea there is that we can better leverage those funds to do projects that aren't piecemeal, where you're creating an extension of pipe that's a pipe to nowhere, essentially, until it's connected years later to other pipes. So that seems like a smart approach to this, to have the development community pay toward the build-out of the purple pipe system. And I just had a conversation with Water Utilities about that today, coincidentally. With respect to how we capture wastewater, and that's interesting that the water that would be considered wastewater, the effluent, so to speak, from your facility is cleaner than what came in. We do have our pure water program now. So if that water is going to our wastewater treatment plant, a significant percentage of that is being recycled. And as that capacity for recycling grows, we'll see more of our potable water supply coming locally.
One comment about the recycled water to farmland, which we were on track to receive, it got pushed back when the Southmore Hills Community Plan was pushed back. So that was something that until we get that plan adopted, which we hope is going to be the end of 2024, the City of Oceanside's recycled water won't come out to the farmers, which is a great way to help us. And it was on track, but we pushed back the Southmore Hills Community Plan, and now we're waiting. So that's why it's just another one of those, you want to preserve farmland, but you got to start to think about it. Yeah.
Yes. Now all of the Del Oro development and where the businesses are over there, I mean, all of that has been built out. I don't know why Purple Pipe didn't get pushed out there.
Probably cost.
The cost?
Yeah.
I mean, but if we're asking the businesses and the, industry to fund that, I don't know where that
So
cost comes
Commissioner
to the
Anthony,
city.
members of the Planning Commission, clearly, the capital improvement program for recycled water is something that's driven by the Water Utilities Department. So those are questions that probably are better asked of that group. We don't have those answers for you.
Okay, any other comments or questions or suggestions or feedback to Russ and the team? I will thank you, Russ, this is great. This is a good update and reminder of what we're trying to do here. There's a lot here, too, to think about and chew on, and so I'm glad that you'll be bringing back these elements to us so we can give some more thought to feedback or comments or questions. But that being said, anything that I missed or?
Thanks for a good presentation and overview, and the interaction's been good, so appreciate it.
I would say the same, Russ. You've been doing a phenomenal job for how many years. I don't know how you keep your spirit and energy going on this because it's been a long process. So thank you for all your work. Yeah.
I will say one thing that Commissioner Malik touched on, and like sort of paraphrasing what was said, and that is driving the development more towards the smart and sustainable corridors when possible to preserve those single-family communities. I think, like Commissioner Malik indicated, that's a challenging lift, if you will, because we have seen a couple of projects already, lately where it's a single-family development, high density and whatnot. So I would encourage those conversations, very much so. Not to say if somebody finds a vacant piece of land in a single-family community, like a Fire Mountain, there are some still available that development still may occur, but when possible, if the drivers can push them more towards those smart and sustainability corridors, that would be great.
Right, yeah, and I really appreciate the city planner introducing that dynamic into this discussion, because that's really important. And we are seeing some shift in housing preferences, particularly among the younger and the older, where a lot of millennials and others are looking to live in more urban environments. They're not as interested necessarily in owning, and they're not necessarily interested in mowing lawns and doing those kinds of things. And then you have empty nesters, and some of us will be those very soon, who are looking to downsize. Yours truly being one of those. So hopefully the market will drive that change.
I have two things to add to the remarkable community elements. We have a lot of remarkable community elements, I think, in Oceanside. That's why I'm glad to live here and I'm proud to live here. But two other ones that could be great, hopefully they'll come to fruition, is Ocean Camp, which would be an amazing and remarkable community. And then also a robust agritourism out there in South Moore Hills. That would be another great thing for our city. So I'm hoping that both of those can be added into, hopefully, the remarkable community elements soon.
And I can assure you, we've identified South Moore Hills and our ag district as one of our
Jewels.
amazing and unique assets. Yeah.
All right, cool.
Well, this is a discussion item, but we do invite public comment. I see a few folks in the audience. If you'd like to come forward and provide any feedback or commentary, you're more than welcome to before we close this discussion out. How can you not, Mr. Bryan? Come on forward.
I also volunteer. I'm a jobber volunteer.
We'll give you 3 minutes. We're not going to give you 5 on this one.
Just Main Street, Oceanside, Gumaro, Escarcega, they're doing a $4+ million job of wonderful things down. They don't have any homeless people in Oceanside, did you know?
They have security.
Yeah, but at the farmer's market, no, it's not 24/7. But you know all. Main Street, Oceanside.
No, they'd have security.
Great, thank you. All right, any final thoughts or before we suspend this discussion? Great, again, thank you, Russ, for that update, and appreciate that. We'll go then to Commissioner, City Planner reports. I was trying to think, I thought I had something, but I don't have anything as an update tonight, but maybe I'll remember as we go around the dais here. Vice Chair Morrissey?
No report.
No report. Commissioner Bama?
No report.
Thank you. Commissioner Anthony?
No report.
Commissioner Dodds?
No report.
And Commissioner Malik?
No report.
Wow, it's a clean sweep. City Planner, I know you have a report or at least some updates and upcoming events.
Yes, thank you, Chair Rosales, members of the Planning Commission. Just real briefly, upcoming items for the Planning Commission include the return of the Loma Alta Terraces project that was considered by this commission back in, I believe it was late August, so that'll be coming back at the next Planning Commission meeting. And then we also have a conditional use permit for storage of hazardous materials for an existing pool supply company within the airport industrial park area. And then on October 23rd, the Planning Commission is going to be asked to consider a recommendation to the City Council on a general plan amendment, zone change, tentative map and development plan for a project known as Pacifica. It's at the old Oceanside Unified School District elementary school site on the North Valley. It used to be known as Pacifica Elementary, and it consists of 164 townhomes and associated improvements. Moving on to City Council, at the meeting on October 4th, we'll be asking the City Council to consider a new density cap for transit-oriented development, mixed-use development projects in the downtown in the downtown district. I think we've discussed this a couple times before. Currently, there's no density for mixed-use projects within the downtown zoning district, and now we're proposing a density cap. And then on October 18th, there will be 2 historic permits, 2 single-family homes being designated for local designation. One's at 431 South Nevada Street, the other one's at 906 West Street. And then finally, the application that this commission considered at their last meeting on Avocado Road has been appealed to City Council, and we're still working to determine when that hearing will occur. Thank you.
Thank you. I did have a question, City Planner. The Eddie Jones warehouse down on in the airport area, you mentioned airport, which reminded me. Is that an item, it's a large project being proposed. Is that an item that will be coming to the Planning Commission? What's the status on that project?
Certainly. Thank you for your question, Chair Rosales. So currently, staff is reviewing the screen check, what's known as a screen check draft of the environmental impact report. Once we do that and we get the document to where we're comfortable with it and represents the city's objective opinion on this matter regarding potential environmental impacts, it'll be released for a public comment period of 45 days, depending on how long it takes to respond to those comments. And once those response to comments are ready, we'll be ready to issue the final environmental impact report and bring that project to this body for consideration. Yeah, it's a speculative warehouse consisting of approximately 545,000 square feet at the old TE connectivity site. They're adjacent to Bennett Road and just south of the river.
Yeah, I think the core issue might be lots of traffic.
One of the things that they're requesting is a trucking facility. And so anything, our zoning ordinance and use definition considers any use that has more than 6 heavy trucks on site at one time a trucking terminal, and that requires a conditional use permit. And the other aspect of the project that requires a conditional use permit is its sheer size. You can do a 50,000 square foot building by right, but anything over a 50,000 square foot building requires approval of a CUP.
Great. I think we are through our agenda, so we are adjourned until October 9th. Thank you.